So today's agenda, it's all about climate risk. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, this is one of the most interesting and actually fun parts of climate disclosures. It's not, it's hard work, and sometimes it can feel a bit dry, especially when you are head down into carbon accounting, as an example. But climate risk really does bring a lot of stakeholders together. And I'm really excited to kind of share this with you because maybe you can get some fun and some really impact work and hard work out of this part of climate disclosures. This is the second last session of our compliance countdown series. The last one will be in 2 weeks, and that's going to be about carbon emissions. Carbon emissions, setting targets, how to go about it, how technology can help you. But we believe that with solutions like ours in the market and others, that metrics and targets will become easier over time, not in terms of ambitions. Setting targets is hard and it really depends on a lot of things, but doing the carbon inventory aspect, it should become easier every day. Again, interrupt us at any point, ask questions. Maka will keep an eye on the chat, and I'll love to answer your particular concerns about climate risk disclosures. Quick recap, we do it at the beginning of every session. So by the time you've attended the 5 sessions, you know this by heart. But what is it? What is this new rules in Australia that forces large organizations to report? And what do they want? In conclusion, they want 3 things. They want to look at things that can impact your company in a changing climate. And they want you to analyze these things or these impacts in a short term, medium term, and long term. And of course, how they affect your company's cash position, on how you borrow money or you make money, right? It's trying to link how climate impacts financially your organization and what are the risks and opportunities coming from that. This is alongside financial disclosures. So think about not only the sustainability angle, but really like how is your company performing. One other thing as well, it's about the people who read this report, and that people might change between organization, but try to present with these primary users in mind who will be interested in knowing more about your company and will judge your company based on how you disclose, how they give you money, how they purchase from you, how they become stakeholders or shareholders in your organizations. As always, we always tend to look at the source of the documents, save the legislation in your computer, print it like Maka has done it in the past, and have it handy. The core contents are not very extensive, and it's always good to refer back to it when NetNada is not around or you're doing other things and you have to answer a quick question. So have it available. And these are 4 main concepts. For whom? These primary users. For how long? What is the duration on how you're communicating in the different time periods of it, and then this core part of your disclosure, the climate-related physical risks, and of course, the transition risks and opportunities of your organization. Here, we're going to deep dive into what those are, but this is a quick kind of preview. Physical is about things that are tangible, storms, rising levels, increasing temperature, while the transitions are more about changing legislations, consumer preferences, opportunities for new business, and so forth. A big thing as well, we also covered this in the strategy session last week, it's doing this all with this lens of reasonably expectation, undue effort. It's not trying to add a new heavy load onto what you do day to day. Is what can you really see that is material for your business today, and what money and resources do you have to actually tackle it or analyze that. Okay, so it's about meeting you where you at as a company. Finally, in this quick recap, remember, there is assurance in the things that we will be doing through climate disclosures. They're not going to be assured at the same time as everything else. There's different parts that change. This is a really good kind of graph to have or table to have close by for you to understand how things change over time. And we are in this first year journey. This is going to be a 5-year process. By that point in time, you have SMEs reporting as well. Supply chains are integrated. So really think about this being business as usual as we move forward. Just because a section is not going to be assured doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be disclosed. Okay, different things. The assurance and the disclosure are separate. You still need to disclose as part of the legislation. The prep for being assurance ready as we go through this process, remember, it's all about documentation, it's all about processes, and really understand that this needs to be seen as your company integrating all these decisions, all this research, all the consultant engagements, all the platform that you're using into something that you actually care about day to day. So think about the methodologies, think about how whatever system you use is helping you also get those documentations ready to be able to disclose that and to be able to bring confidence not only to auditors, but to your board as well. If you're doing a carbon inventory and it's going to be sign off, they're going to ask the question, how did you come up with this number? Make sure you have that documentation ready. If you're going to pick some risks, you have to document why. So all those things that don't make this process a black box are really, really important. And finally, because this touches a lot of things in the business, keep in mind that if you have the structure, if you have the size, you should be engaging different people from different parts of your organization. And this is some broad coverage that we kind of mention or we recommend to our clients, but finance and sustainability definitely involved. You might not have a risk department, but if you have operations or someone in the commercial side, also really important as you look into opportunities because you want to know where your business might be heading. All right, so really good to have an understanding that in this part of the disclosure specifically, it is about stakeholder engagement. It is about having lots of people in the room, arguing, contributing, criticizing, being constructive. So don't shy away from engaging others during this process.
And I think, Alfonso, just jumping in there before we go into the questions, I think it's good to highlight that the risk workshops that we do with our clients, it's based on that, having different stakeholders in the room, discussing, doing a bit of pre-work, then coming back to them, doing some work in-house and coming back to them to keep discussing. So we need their insights as well from different stakeholders, different departments to make sure we're capturing everything. And we understand, and different departments understand the risks they're facing.
Perfect. Maka, do you want to launch the quiz?
Yes, for sure. Give me 2 seconds.
While we launched the quiz, we also had James Stewart. Hi, James. Pleasure to see you again with a question about are we going to touch on the topic of Scope 3 emissions and whether they should be included in your report? And then he also mentions the angle that with the use of AI and how that drives up emissions and how we should include it. Great question, James. That's going to be probably showing up in your transition risks. As you include Scope 3 calculations, depending on your ambition level, at the moment it's not mandatory, but it will be very soon. If you have a big spike in your cloud usage, as an example, and how you get billed in that, and you're trying to look more at activity data, you should be aware that your own use as an organization, not as a nation, as an organization, if you're dependent on those high emitting activities, you might see more exposure into a Scope 3 calculation, right? So think about it this way, and then how you can better position or you can better change providers or ask better questions as you do those activities. I'm happy to deep dive into that, especially the use of AI, but there's a lot of questions around data center usage, data usage, water usage, climate resilience in that topic in particular, from like a top-down approach. Great question in a very, very sensitive topic at the moment. All right. The quiz is underway. Thanks, Maka, for launching it. We are 60% replying. So if everyone can get going and read the questions, trying to get those numbers up.
And we'll deep dive into scenario analysis shortly, understanding what it is, what is requested, and so on. But this is just to get a brief idea of where you stand or what your understanding about it.
As you can probably see by now, Maka gave you a bit of a tricky question in there because it is a single choice. But as you can probably see, we have a good coverage across the different criteria, but there is a primary purpose in that. So, Maka, do you want to highlight a bit of the question and why you were asking it?
Yeah, for sure. So as you can see, in a way, there's no incorrect answer, but there is a primary purpose, and this is as much as most of you chose, is to test the business resilience. What's resilient and what this is about, we'll talk about it shortly. But again, yes, it's important to meet investors' disclosure requirements. These are the primary uses. Yes, it's also to understand financial losses with certainty, with a level of certainty in the future, and to align with competitors could be as well. But the main reason for this is to understand and to test the resilience of your business and operations.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to continue now. Thanks for that. All right. Let me just try to get this out of the way. 1 second. Perfect. Any other questions? Please do let me know. And also, Sam, thanks for posting. We'll get back to the question in a second. The key pressure from key clients is not it is one of the drivers why people are doing this earlier. And we see that and I'd love to learn more about your industry, Sam, but it's all about how do you win these contracts? How is the financial connection to climate disclosures? And you might have bigger clients that already been hit by mandatory reporting to ask their clients or their suppliers to disclose that information. So you will see in that assurance pathway or timeline to disclosure, probably companies having to do this earlier before legislation hits them because they needed to win contracts with government, with larger clients, or in critical industries. That is more and more common, and we also help your clients do that. Great question. What do you need to disclose under risk management? This is the core of the presentation. This is about identifying, prioritizing, and monitoring these risk and opportunities, and to showcase that this is integrated with processes within your business. And I'll touch later how you actually integrate those and how you build that risk management framework, and make sure that you do it in a way that can later meet that assurance requirements. So don't just put out some risk and say, this is what's impacting my business, but having the process behind that mapped out is really, really key. So that effective documentation and the cross functions that are involved in these steps are really, really important. We talked about scenarios, we talked about time horizons, and now I want to give you some visualization of what that looks like. If you're on this call, you're primarily already familiar with the different pathways, and it's all about, as a company, you will have to select which scenarios you have to choose and what things bring with those. But these are one of the most commons, and for the reporting purposes, you'll have to choose at least 2 to meet the legislation requirements. You can see one needs to be 1.5 degrees and the other one needs to be above that. And in these curves on how us as a nation or as a planet will decarbonize over time will bring with it different risks, right? In one curve, you might see less temperature increase, less exposure to heat waves, or less occurrences of extreme weather events. While in some scenarios, in some pathways, in different horizons, you might see things that might bring more impact to your business. If you have a supply chain or you have an example, a warehouse, and you have more days where your logistics are disrupted by extreme weather events in one scenario versus the other, your primary users of this report want to understand the different consequences of the different pathways, right? So you have everything that we're going to do about selecting risks and opportunities need to have different pathways associated with them. And I'll later also help you visualize how do you actually report on that. So stay tuned. Incorporating these things into your broader framework, if you already have an example, a risk matrix, it's super important. Because at the moment, you might have a risk register for your business based on different things. What the audience, what the primary readers want to see is you now bring a climate lens on top of that. So not just meeting the reporting requirements, but a complete risk picture for your business that takes into account climate in there. Again, about decision making, about having a link to governance on how you make these decisions, and finally, the long-term business success, in this case, assuming that your business will be resilient to climate change and will continue to exist into the future on a healthy, profitable way. This is a very simple diagram, and I'll show you that the source of this diagram in the past was just kind of like built by us. But if you're sitting today as an individual in your organization, you have something that happened in the past, different experiences of weather events, different business performance, and you're sitting today at this now present. Your role now is to look into the future in this activity and understand how the different scenarios in terms of climate will impact your business. There's multiple to pick. There's multiple impacts. Your role as a leader and to bring other people into the room is to go at this cone into the future and see how the different scenarios impact how your business makes money, how your business loses money, how your competitors position themselves, and opportunities that arise from that. It's all about sitting in this chair, in this boardroom, in these workshops, and trying to visualize what the future will look like for your business. In the past, leaders would do this just on, marketing spend, different technologies, etc. Now they're just being asked to do it with a climate lens on top. So it should be something that, from a good business perspective, has already been done already. Perfect. All right. Maka, make sure you pay attention to the Q&A as well, because they keep coming through. So if you open that, just let me know what things are coming up. What good looks like? Good looks being specific about something, because we care about your company, not the whole of Australia. So if you have a warehouse in Queensland, we want to see how the sea level rise impacts your Queensland sites. So maybe it's property as well, property close to the beach. We don't want to say that Australia coastal regions are going to be exposed to sea level rise. We want to understand about how you are located within that. If you can, we want you to quantify the impact of those risks. So if your asset, close to a mangrove or close to the ocean is worth $5 million, we want you to say, hey, we have an exposure of $5 million to that. And if we had to relocate or make the property more climate resilient or move it back or add barriers in front of the ocean, we want to kind of estimate what that cost will be. The same thing, when we're picking these scenarios and when we're building these risk matrix, we want to showcase the evidence of these tools in those sources. And we also want to ensure that we tell the reader how often we are reviewing this. This is the same thing that we did in the strategy webinar, is if you want to change your strategy, if you want to see the impact of risk, tell us that you might look at your risk register every time you're going to buy an asset above $1 million, or every time you're going to launch a new product, or maybe every quarter. We just want to show some evidence of that happening over time. If you don't show evidence of monitoring, so maybe if you're doing this for the first time, you're rushing through that, it's going to look a bit quick. So make sure you do as much as you can to have this as business as usual before you go ahead and disclose. So time gives you the benefit of showcasing your evidence that you've done this already.
And we got some great questions here. Excuse me. Are transition risks required to be included in the climate risk analysis?
Yes. So as we go up on that spreadsheet, you'll have, you might do this, David, and you might not see any material transition risks that applies to your business. But if they're material, they should be included. But it depends on your documentation and how you came about those and why you've decided to exclude any transition risk.
And then we have another question from Milena, but I think you'll jump into this once we go into the template, the risk template. But it's about how would you integrate the different time horizons into risk rating? Would you do this separately, each time frame, or integrate it into one main metric?
We believe that the time horizon is being separated by the mandatory short-term, medium-term, and long-term. You'd see once we open this risk register that things should have a different impact or likelihood depending of the horizon and depending on the pathway. Not everything is made equal. It might be the case, but you should be changing up the different risk likelihoods and consequences depending on the horizons that you pick. So one single metric might not provide enough granularity for a good assessment of your disclosure from the reader point of view. Perfect. Keep those questions coming. This makes things way easier from our end. All right. Now moving into the pitfalls to avoid. This is a bit of like what kind of bad looks like in rewriting those. And when we show evidence and examples at the end, we'll kind of bring this to life. Be specific. Don't say extreme weather events, like which weather events and where are impacting your business. And we'll touch a bit on like databases that you can use to kind of see these things. Show ownership. If it's only managed by a report that a consultant gave to you, or it's just one sustainability associate or sustainability lead dealing with this risk, it does not look integrated. Because if we know that your business already has a risk register and already makes decisions a certain way, what we want is these things to also live within that function or within that process. Yes, your sustainability lead will own the selection of those maybe, or triggering how you're gonna like renew those and how you should revisit those. But we want to showcase that it's evidence that it's in the business. The avoidance of link to financial planning. What I mean by that is currently your risk assessment influences how you do business. The same thing will happen to your climate risk. We've touched on this on the strategy webinar 2 weeks ago. This link to financial planning can be paraphrased or mentioned in a way of, if there is no undue effort of doing so, if you can't estimate the financial impact in the first year of this risk, it is okay. However, showcase evidence that you don't have the resources to do that estimation. No process description, same thing. We want explanations on how you identified and how you prioritize and how you monitor things. Having an enterprise risk management framework does help with that. And same thing, we want evolution. We want you to change this over time. We want you to showcase how your different mitigation strategies that you've implemented are bringing down the likelihood or the consequences of some of these risks. That's what we want to see, because your business should improve over time, and that's what the audience wants to visualize from a disclosure perspective. Any questions on that? Maka, do you have another quiz?
We do have a question from David. He's asking about transition risks and scenarios, the extent that Australia sets more or less ambitious policies compared to other countries that will affect, again, domestic transition risk for high emitters. How should this nuance be dealt with? And I guess, David, your question here is also when you're operating in different countries.
Perfect. Like I said in the past, this comes down to all about materiality. If you operate within the Australian context and 98% of your revenue is from Australian consumers, and so is what guides your business, even if you have a 2% impact of a different region that may have different exposure, your energy in theory should not be there. Maybe you try to decrease your footprint in Australia and go elsewhere, therefore you need to meet those criteria or the expectations of the market in that area, 100%. In this case, the scenarios that have been published by the Climate Risk Assessment of Australia or the Net Zero Plan could be your guiding manual to this selection and to understand what's going to come to your industry. If your team or your organization deems that those ambitions are not best practice or are not relevant enough for doing your business, you can go and find other sources elsewhere. There's not a single source that showcases that you should be following what has been released by the government or something else. You can pick those as long as they are documented, robust, and have strong methodologies. So it's up to your criteria. We encourage people to kind of follow on the first year a path of low resistant, what is readily available, what things don't you have to pay for, and those documents released by the government is what's readily available for the corporates here in Australia. It is a small nuance in terms of your ambitions level versus disclosure that you have to do. This is all about showcasing how ambitious your company is. If you don't see that those targets are ambitious enough for what you want to be as a business, you can go and choose something elsewhere as well. There's a quote that has been said in the past, which is disclosures are easy. The ambition is what's hard, right? It is really easy to say we couldn't do it. We set the minimum target possible, but how are you going to be perceived by your competitors, by your audience? That's the really important thing. Maka, you have any quiz for this section, or we should move on?
Yes, I'm launching it right now.
We are flying through this. And thanks for all the questions. Keep them coming. I can see a big question from Anne coming through. I'm just going to take a second to read that while people complete the quiz. All right. Anne is coming back with a really good question from property management or property ownership and development. If you have, dozens or hundreds of properties, how do you go about, identifying the physical risk across all of them and where they're located and so forth? And it could be really hard to do so. My suggestion, Anne, is while a detailed assessment might not be possible in your year one, lack of resources, lack of time, I would suggest strongly to not just say that in your disclosure. You should at least do a desktop analysis of a material proportion of that assets. A good example is you might have 100 properties, but maybe your portfolio is concentrated in a certain area in terms of value. You might just look at those. Or you might at least just do an area, maybe New South Wales or Sydney region, because you have access to the data, and you'll start with that, and then you can do extrapolation, or next year you deep dive into that. As a reader of your report, if you are in the management property assets as an industry, and I see in year one that you haven't conducted any physical risk assessment of your portfolio, I wouldn't see that as like a best practice, and I would see that as a big risk, knowing that how much time you had to prepare to tackle this. That's kind of how it will be perceived. Of course, it won't be assured in the first year, and you can disclose we didn't have enough resources to do it the first year. But I'll just be super, super cautious about not doing anything before your first year disclosure. I hope that answers your question, Anne, but I'm happy to deep dive into that. Great question. It's all about that undue effort and how you are perceived in the ways that you disclose. Thank you for everyone who is participated in the quiz. There's a few more people that haven't answered, a couple, but we're going to end it regardless. We had 80% participation. Let me just go in here and end the poll, and I'm going to share the results as well, because sharing is caring. Maka, do you want to touch on this quiz and what you're trying to highlight?
Yeah, for sure. So the main question, as you can see, is understanding what's the common oversight from what we are seeing from our clients. And we see that what clients are struggling the most is actually in integrating this risk into financial planning, being able to do the financial quantitative assessment of, even if it's not required in the beginning, and most of the companies start on a qualitative aspect, integrating this into the financial planning is key to really understand how this is affecting what can be done from a strategic perspective.
Perfect. So like we said, maybe on the back of what Anne has said in the past, there is effort to do some estimation and some modeling. So some teams are only saying they have some exposure, but it's hard to quantify what it might mean, the frequency, the impact on your infrastructure, the impact on the disruption of your sales. But if you can, that integration with financial planning, budget allocation, it's super important. Maybe that budget starts at being, we're going to allocate budget to do a deep dive assessment. And that's where you start. But again, all about your expectation, and people like NetNada or your consultant can help you guide into the expectations and ambitions that you might have. Perfect. All right. Now, I want to take a bit of a change, and I want you to go and see what a risk management framework might look like. This is what you might use to collaborate with your colleagues, what you might use with NetNada to then upload it into the NetNada platform. We think this is a very valuable resource. This has been only slightly edited. There's an original version of this from the department, and we've kind of changed it to focus on councils, but more and now shifted to organizations and corporates. Now, I'm just going to share a different screen and I'll explain a bit of how this template works. By now, you should have access to this template. If you didn't receive access, you didn't get the emails, or you didn't saw my post on LinkedIn, please do let me know. I'd love to book a call with you, show you how it's used in detail and how you can kickstart that into your business. If you're one of our clients, of course, you know that this is around, you know that we'll meet with us and Maka to help you really nail down this and have all of our assistant in there. So let's deep dive into some lovely spreadsheets. In the world of AI, we still have spreadsheets. And even though that NetNada is very automated, we do like sharing free resources in an Excel format that everyone can use. This spreadsheet contains 5 tabs or 6 tabs. One is just a description of how it works. On this page, I would like to highlight one thing. I'm going to zoom in this section. Your risk and opportunity statement of what something might look like and how you present that to the board, or you actually incorporate into your report, is a combination of several things. It's about the risk driver, what drives that, the values that are at risk. In this case, we touch about infrastructure, but we also be different sectors or the productivity of your workforce. A very good example of this, speaking with the client, they have a workforce in Madrid. There's some of the developers, they do software. There was a heat wave in Madrid this summer in Spain. They couldn't work for a week and a half. It was too hot. Not everyone had aircon. People were just too bothered to work. It was really hard. It was really humid. So productivity dropped massively. You need to be able to take into account how many heat waves are going to be happening where your workforce is and how that might impact productivity. Because 1 week of productivity, if you have 100 staff in a location, could be huge. Same thing, you might have an offshore team in the Philippines. Maybe there's now more cyclones or tropical storms in there. If your customer support or accounting arm is in the Philippines and they cannot go to work because they can't ride the motorcycles to via the flood waters and so forth, this is what we're seeing, right? So we want to really understand that impact on, maybe it's lower productivity, maybe it's input cost, whatever it might be, the consequences, how that actually impacts, and then this all concludes in a statement. So having this framework in your mind might be really useful. Now, back on how this lovely spreadsheet works. Your first goal is to, at the end, have something that ends up like this. Is you build your risk matrix and how you're going to be having your likelihood ratings. You can use this off the shelf, and then your consequences. If you're a risk professional or maybe worked in finance in the past, you would know to see some matrices like this in the past, and this we're going to use to then label our risk opportunities and so forth. The first thing we're going to do is scope, is build that first column that we've done. And this is in a workshop environment. Come in here and just type it down. What are the values at risk, right? Just really list out things. There's no wrong answer. Do it by yourself and share it with a colleague, and then maybe then present to your sustainability committee. There's no wrong way to do about it. Decide on what's...
Would you mind zooming in a bit?
Yeah, no worries. 1 second.
To make it easier.
Yeah. Then it's about what was asked in the past in the questions. What's going to be of interest to begin with? Are you going to look at Australia? Australia in a different region as well? Do you operate in New Zealand, in Europe, Middle East? Doesn't really matter, but note those down. So this is about building that backbone of what you're doing. And then go to this. If you do have an enterprise risk management framework, review that. Have you done it? Yes or no? And write and document as much as you can. And lastly, today you have a sustainability committee. Who's in there? Or who do you want to be in there? So write those names down. Try to bring those people in the conversation because they will be useful for the next steps of the spreadsheet or the process of disclosing risks. Then comes about, this is a very intense page and you read it at your own time, but here we'll give you examples of the summary of physical risks in Australia, some database sources, where they're generally located, and some other transition risks and opportunities, right? This is specific to Australia. Your policy, regulation, reputation, and all of those things are labeled in this page. And if you go in here, we now start visualizing a bit of those different scenarios. Depending on the scenario, low emissions, moderate emissions, and high emissions, and the different time zones, you might see different things showing up. So as you can see here, your rain and flood exposure in a short term, 2030, is not present. Okay? So this is how you build those things, or you can start visualizing how you're going to disclose how this impacts your company. As a next step, as you look and learn how to do this, you want to be able to review those things, review the graphics, and really document what you thought about them, if these things might be applicable to your company or not. And then into the bulk of the work, okay? And this is what I'm saying. This is why you should book a session with your colleagues, with us, with the consultant to get this going. But now this is about really documenting what's the opportunity link and the timeframes with that. There's a lot of information going on, but I'm just giving you the framework or the foundations for you to read it over time and knowing that if you follow every step, you are able to get to the end of the process. This is optional. You don't have to do it. But this is more about opportunities than physical risks. I just want to go back here to the risk register, which is then after you've looked at the scenarios, after you've done your scoping, you do the bulk of the work here. And if I slide to the right, you would see your risk ratings coming up. And there was a question that was asked before. That's why I was kind of trying to skip to the process, which is all about your risk rating depends on the scenario and depends on the timing. You can see here there's a present day, there's a low emissions pathway with the medium term, and the same risk has changed in rating. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. Your time horizons and your scenarios impact the risk rating that you are giving to that risk, opportunity, or whatever it might be. And you can go through this process. Of course, if there's an opportunity, there won't be risk ratings, but you can start building this in your own time, read to the descriptions to this process, and by the end of it, you'll have a complete risk register that you can then embed into your other company's risk register. If this is the first one, this is it. You started with climate, so congratulations. But it might not be the same for everyone. And finally, I just want to give you an example. If you're doing a final snapshot, you actually want to report on this. This is the framework that you might publish as evidence on how you went about selecting those things for your organization. It's very concise, it's very simple, but it takes some work to nail or to verify that it's done correctly. But with this template, you can get going on your risk disclosure if you operate in Australia. There'll be other sources, other databases that you have to use, and you will have to complement this with your inventory of carbon emissions, your governance, but this will be a really, really good start for you to get going. I'm going to go back into the presentation now, but I just want to know if anyone did not see this framework going around, and if you do need it, please put in the chat or email me afterwards, and Maka and I will share that with you as soon as possible.
Also, I think it would be interesting to know if anyone has already started doing the risks assessment. If you can put it in the chat just to have an idea. And actually, Anne is asking, I lost the chat right now. What is the source of the scenario information that you just showed?
The scenario for this particular template is the IPCC scenarios, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that just now, but that will be that.
And yes, of course, we'll send the template after today's.
Yeah, perfect. There was a question coming through, which is, so is a carbon footprint in the risk management reports key outputs for reporting? Yes. You don't have to disclose this whole thing, but you'll have to grab, and I will show you examples of what that looks like in a report as part of your disclosure. So how many emissions? Definitely have to do that. And what risks has your company identified? Same thing, key in the report. And now I'm going to share my screen back to the presentation. Let me see.
It's a very popular template.
It is a very popular template. We're very happy. Let me just go in here and go back to 1 second. Why can't I find this again? Let me go in here. Now you're seeing my whole thing. All right. Are we back in the presentation?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So this physical, are you seeing yourself as well, Marco? Or are you just seeing the presentation?
The presentation.
Okay, perfect. So what are these climate-related risks? We've touched on this, but physical risks are things that you can touch. They're acute. They happen suddenly, or they happen over a long term. So sea level rise, temperatures, drought, all of this will be in the template for the Australian kind of region. There could be more, and you can investigate if they're material. And then the transition risks are, like it was discussed and David brought it up, policy like legislation, carbon pricing being introduced, stricter emissions laws if you are in different industries. Could be also market-driven approaches, clients asking you to report on these things. You need to be able to identify that as a risk. And if you don't do it, you'll be left behind in a sense. And here I can give you some examples. A good one in the property sector is if you don't have a neighbor's rating, or there's no climate resilient, or you're like low energy operating, you might actually devalue that asset if you have like a commercial property, as an example. So things like that you start reading in the news and the impact of climate legislation, try to distill those things and see how does that impact your risk register as your organization goes through this process. This is a bit of a repetition of what I showed in that spreadsheet, but gives you a really good snapshot, and we'll share this presentation as well. Really good insights on presenting this to a board as an example to spark conversations, to start this happening in your organization. You can draw on these diagrams to really map out and start thinking in a constructive way on how does your organization fit within this context. These types of risk, there's this physical transition, like we said, and for every risk, there could be an opportunity. Doesn't have to be a one-to-one matching, but just understand there's always like the positive side if your business tries to capture a changing in trend on how you could do that. So just be really aware of that. That might be a one-to-one match between a risk and then an opportunity if your company decides to mitigate that or capture that instance of climate change. So how to assess? Start with scenario analysis. Explore the different pathways that we've shown at the beginning, the lines. Go to the template and uncover the hidden risks. Understand then over time how they could impact your business. Maybe something drops to zero because in the medium term, you've actually changed markets, you actually invested heavily in the technology of change where your properties are located, and that risk actually drops in terms of impacts. And then inform your strategic response on how you're going to react. Assess the likelihood and the magnitude, where it's coming from, how likely it is to happen based on this now historical information and projections, and the magnitude. There might be a lot of like heat waves in Spain, but if you have no stuff in there, there's no impact on your business. Finally, if you can offer a bit of financial impact of those risks, right? If you don't do something, devaluation of assets, impacting sales, higher churn because you don't have customer success from overseas, all of these things it will be fantastic if you can quantify them in a sense, not just saying we will be impacted with a high likelihood. Now, this is the end of the presentation, but I just want to really kind of, getting to the end, showcase how companies are putting this into reports. This is Ventia, construction company. They've done probably a more serious approach to risk management that I've shown in the template. But when they go to disclose, it's this simple diagram to begin with, where they've showcased that they use 4 climate scenarios, right? And they describe those. They say, okay, this is fast action as a society, insufficient action. They've drawn the scale, and they use the IPCC as a base. But they kind of, just for the reader that might not be proficient in climate disclosures, it showcases what each one means. That step that you're seeing here is the last one, is at step 7. But by going through this process of what I showed you and follow the timeline, after you've done all of that, you might disclose as part of what you're doing, something like this. This is all resources that you should be able to follow at your own time. As you can see, there's like an optional approach to everyone, but just be aware that the hardest part is this identify and this scoping. Everything else should kind of roll on from that. It is not easy if you've never done it in the past, but just be aware that, like, go give yourself some time, try to do it early, and try to leverage different reports, your consultant, NetNada, whatever it might be, to help you assign those risks in ratings. Maka, do you want to launch the last quiz?
Yeah, give me 2 seconds.
Any other questions on everything that we've covered? This is the best, a bit less dense than the strategy session, so hopefully it's a bit easier on you. But it's also the most, for me, interested, that I'm personally interested in, and that our clients or stakeholders are interested in, because it involves discussions and tangible things that they could actually go and implement. Sometimes carbon emissions is just a number.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in. I'm actually going to leave the last poll for the end, because it's about we want to organize an in-person event after the last session. So see if anyone's available for that, but we'll touch base once we finish.
I'm not going to skim through this part, but it's about how do you prioritize. In here, we also have some models, and it goes back to that formula. I won't spend too much time on this, but you can explore on how do you list out the methodology of prioritizing different risks, because you might pick up a bunch of them, and then you have to exclude some before you report because they're not material or they don't impact things at a certain threshold that you're deemed comfortable to report. Using risk matrix, again, we share examples. If you message us, we can share more examples, but go and actually find public reports on how they talk about risk. Venti is a good example. EY has a kind of mock example. The University of Sydney has published one. There'll be more and more companies reporting on those. We are creating a database of all these reports in a central place, so you can access them quickly and easy, and depending on your industry, for inspiration. So stay tuned for that. But sometimes looking at the end goal can really help you visualize what good looks like, or what a disclosure looks like, because there's different levels of ambitions in each one. The key reporting areas as well, to kind of summarize what we talk about, so you have a main takeaway from that. And this is inspired from risk management in general, not related to climate, but process for risk and identifying those, process for opportunities and identifying those, the changes in those processes, what happens once you know what they are, and then integrating that back into your risk management framework. This is very common for risk professionals, but as sustainability professionals, it might be the first time you're looking at these words or frameworks or ways of going about doing these assessments. That's why sometimes having a risk person involved might really help out, because they're already familiar with this. They're just now learning a new topic. Those now going really heavy into the legislation. All of this is not made up by us. You can always go back to the legislation of WASP to look at the paragraphs that ask you what you should be disclosing. And here we kind of not hyperlink, but mention where you can find this in the legislation and why we telling you these things, basically.
Exactly, and just to summarize this on the coming slides, conscious of time, I think there's 4 keywords that you'll find in the framework, and it's identifying and assessing. Again, we went through this. What are the processes and policies in place? What are the climate scenarios chosen? Then prioritizing. Again, what's the nature, the likelihood, and the magnitude of those risks in terms of your business and operation? And lastly, monitor. How is that included in your overall risk management? Who's overviewing that? What actions have been taken? How are you comparing year by year? So I think those 4 questions, and again, you'll find these ones in the framework, are identifying, assessing, prioritizing, and monitor when it comes to risk assessments.
Perfect. Thank you, Maka. We have only a few slides left, if I'm not mistaken. Again, how do you monitor those and explaining what those things are? This is inspiration. You don't have to use everything in here, but once you go to this slide, okay, what's going to trigger me monitoring or revisiting what I've selected, get inspiration from this and make those feedback loops. How often can you talk with the same people or bring people involved to make change? Same thing, processes for opportunities. How do you go about including these in your reports? Same thing, some triggers for you to talk about or think about, and also the reference for the legislation. Again, this is more like dry stuff, so I'll leave it to do it at your own time and be able to map the paragraphs. And same thing with the integration to the risk management framework. To what extent? I'm highlighting here the extent and how you can do this in short paragraphs. When you look at example reports, it might be when we do X, Y, Z, we are reviewing our climate risk and opportunities. Might be different trigger, might be acquisitions, might be buying new property, and who's involved as well. Again, same thing. Look to this as inspiration or things to consider. Not everything might adapt to your company based on the size, robustness, and governance of it, but it can help you make those decisions on how you talk about them and you write about them. And I just want to leave some time for questions. Maka will launch the quiz, but for us, this is a fantastic topic. Hopefully that resource that we're going to share is super useful. Hopefully brings some trust on how NetNada is building our clients' risk registers and how we use the platform. But as always, we are here to help. We'd love to kind of meet you in person if possible. We're trying to organize a bit of a catch up. I think in-person events are lovely. I know that everyone is very busy, and we've done several in-person events in the past, but we're just trying to make another one before the end of the year. So trying to assess how people will be available.
And we do understand not everyone's in Sydney. But yeah, again, we're just trying to understand how many people could make it and if it's worth it, if people are interested in meeting in person.
If you love to co-host an event in Melbourne or in Brisbane or in Perth or Adelaide, please do let us know. We're always happy to collaborate. We collaborate a lot with our consultants and our partners. So please do let us know if you want to do that, and appreciate everyone's time. Have a fantastic Thursday. Reach out to us for that template via email so we don't forget. We are here to help. We'd love to have, your attention is very appreciated. And me and Maka are always here to help out and answer any questions.